The Six Wives of Henry VIII, by Alison Weir. Introduction. Imagine for a moment a king so powerful, so charismatic, that his contemporaries called him the greatest man in the world. A man who ruled with such splendor that his court glittered with some of the most fascinating people of the age. This king, Henry VIII, is one of the most extraordinary figures in history, not just for the revolutionary changes he brought to his country, but for a much more personal and much more dramatic reason. He had 6 wives. 6. It's a number that's hard to comprehend even today. But what makes this story truly unforgettable isn't just the number. It's the women themselves. These weren't just names on a royal family tree. They were intelligent, ambitious, principled, and sometimes reckless individuals, each with her own story of love, loss, and survival. Their lives were played out on the world stage, where every private detail, every whispered hope and secret heartbreak, became a matter of public interest, shaping the destiny of a nation. Alison Weir's masterpiece, The Six Wives of Henry VIII, isn't just a history book, it's a journey back in time. It's a bestseller that has captivated millions because it does something remarkable. It peels back the layers of myth and legend to reveal the real human beings behind the portraits. It invites us to understand not just what happened to them, but who they were. Over the next few minutes, we're going to step into the tumultuous world of the Tudor court. We won't just learn about the famous rhyme, divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. We're going to understand the hopes, fears, and impossible choices these women faced. We'll meet the staunch queen who refused to bend, the ambitious woman who changed the course of history, the gentle soul who finally gave the king his son, and the others who followed, each navigating a life of unimaginable privilege and unbearable pressure. By the end of our time together, you will understand a profound lesson about power, love, and destiny. You'll see that the story of these 6 women is more than just a historical drama. It's a timeless lesson in resilience, ambition, and the incredible strength of the human spirit in the face of impossible odds. So, let's begin. Book summary. Before we can truly understand the lives of these 6 queens, we have to understand the world they lived in. It's a world that might seem very foreign to us now. The author, Alison Weir, paints a vivid picture of Tudor England, a place where a woman's role was defined by one simple principle: she was made to serve and obey man. This wasn't just an opinion, it was seen as the divine order of the world. The great reformer John Knox wrote that woman in her greatest perfection was made to serve and obey man. From the moment they were born, women were taught they were inferior to men. Even a queen was expected to be subordinate to her husband, required to learn from him in silence and subjection. A woman's property, her body, her very life became her husband's on her wedding day. While a king could have mistresses, infidelity in a queen was considered treason, an offense punishable by death because it threatened the royal succession. This was the cage of convention that surrounded Henry's wives. They were queens, yes, but they were also prisoners of their time, bound by rules they could never hope to change. Understanding this is the key to unlocking their stories. Our story begins not in England, but in the sun-drenched courts of Spain, with a young princess named Catherine of Aragon. Born in 1485, she was the daughter of 2 of the most powerful monarchs in Europe, Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile. Catherine was raised in a world of war, piety, and immense dynastic pride. From the age of 3, her destiny was sealed. She was betrothed to Arthur, the eldest son of England's new king, Henry VII. This was a political match, designed to secure the shaky Tudor dynasty by allying it with the ancient royalty of Spain. For years, Catherine was raised with one purpose: to one day be the Queen of England. In 1501, at the age of 15, she made the long and perilous journey to a strange, ice-cold land to marry a prince she had never met. The wedding was a magnificent affair, but the marriage was tragically short. Just 5 months later, Prince Arthur died, leaving Catherine a widow at 16, alone in a foreign court. What happened next is one of the most debated questions in English history. Did Catherine and Arthur consummate their marriage? Catherine swore for the rest of her life that they did not. She said they had only shared a bed for a handful of nights, and that she came to her second marriage a true maid, without touch of man. This detail, which seemed small at the time, would one day tear Christendom apart. Henry VII, not wanting to lose the Spanish alliance or Catherine's dowry, proposed a new match. Catherine should marry his second son, the young Prince Henry. It was an unusual solution, as marrying one's brother's widow was forbidden by biblical law. But Catherine's virginity offered a way out. Her mother, Queen Isabella, was satisfied that her daughter remains as she was here, and the Pope granted a special dispensation, a formal permission, to allow the marriage to proceed. For 7 long years, Catherine lived in a state of uncertainty, a political pawn in a game played by kings. Her allowance was stopped, and she was forced to sell her jewels to pay her servants, feeling nearly naked in her shabby gowns. Finally, in 1509, Henry VII died, and the new king, Henry VIII, a handsome and charismatic young man of 18, declared that he would honor the betrothal. He was genuinely fond of Catherine. He admired her dignity and her unwavering faith. He told his council he desired her above all women. He loved her and longed to wed her. On June 11, 1509, they were married, and for a time, they were happy. Henry called Catherine his Sir Loyal Heart, and she adored him in return. Their court was a glittering center of Renaissance culture, filled with music, jousts, and pageants. But one shadow loomed over their marriage: the succession. A queen's primary duty was to produce a male heir. Catherine, tragically, could not seem to fulfill this duty. Over the next several years, she endured a heartbreaking series of failed pregnancies. In 1510, a stillborn daughter. In 1511, a son, Prince Henry, was born, to the great joy of the entire kingdom. But the celebrations were short-lived. The baby died after just 52 days. There were more miscarriages, more infant deaths. Out of at least 6 pregnancies, only one child survived, a daughter, Mary, born in 1516. As the years passed and Catherine grew older, it became clear she would have no more children. By 1524, sexual relations between her and Henry had ceased. The king, now in his 30s, became obsessed. Without a son, the Tudor dynasty was not secure. The threat of another devastating civil war, like the Wars of the Roses that had torn England apart before his father took the throne, was very real. And Henry began to wonder, was his lack of sons a punishment from God? He turned to the Bible, to the book of Leviticus, and found a passage that seemed to speak directly to him. And if a man shall take his brother's wife, it is an unclean thing. They shall be childless. The word childless struck him like a thunderbolt. He had a daughter, yes, but in the eyes of a king needing an heir, he was as good as childless. His conscience, he claimed, was troubled. He started to believe that the Pope's dispensation had been a mistake, and that his marriage to Catherine had been a sin in the eyes of God from the very beginning. And it was right at this moment, as his conscience was supposedly in turmoil, that he fell passionately in love for the first time in his life. Her name was Anne Boleyn. She was not a conventional beauty. She was petite, with dark hair, black eyes that she knew how to use, and a vivacious, witty personality that captivated everyone she met. She was the daughter of an ambitious courtier, Sir Thomas Boleyn, and had spent years at the sophisticated French court, where she had learned to dress with exquisite taste and carry herself with a grace that made men think she was a Frenchwoman born. She returned to England around 1522 and became a maid of honor to Queen Catherine. The court was immediately entranced by her. One of those smitten was Henry Percy, heir to the great earldom of Northumberland, and they secretly became betrothed. But another, more powerful man had also taken notice of Anne, the king himself. Henry, who had had a secret affection for Anne for some time, ordered Cardinal Wolsey to break the engagement. Anne was furious, not at the king, whose involvement she never suspected, but at Wolsey. She swore that if it ever lay in her power, she would have her revenge. Around 1526, the king began his courtship in earnest. He expected Anne to become his mistress, as her own sister Mary Boleyn had been. But Anne refused. She had seen what happened to her sister, cast aside when the king grew tired of her. Anne played a much more dangerous, much more ambitious game. She told the king, "Your wife I cannot be, your mistress I will not be." This refusal, this declaration of her virtue, only inflamed Henry's passion. For 7 long years, he pursued her, writing passionate love letters, showering her with gifts, and growing ever more obsessed. And Anne, with calculated genius, held him at arm's length, fanning the flames of his desire while never surrendering. She knew that the only way to win was to make him believe marriage was the only prize worth having. She saw her opening in the king's troubled conscience. If his marriage to Catherine was invalid, then he was free to marry again. And why shouldn't he marry her? In 1527, Henry began the process of seeking an annulment from the Pope, what would become known as his Great Matter. This is where Catherine of Aragon showed her true strength. When Henry told her of his doubts, her world shattered. But she did not bend. She was the king's true wife, her marriage was valid, and she would stand by that until her death. She believed that Wolsey and Anne Boleyn had led the king astray, and she saw it as her duty to bring him back to his senses. What followed was a legal and diplomatic battle that shook Europe. Catherine appealed to her powerful nephew, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, who effectively held the Pope as a prisoner after the sack of Rome. The Pope, Clement VII, was trapped. He couldn't grant Henry's annulment without angering the emperor, but he couldn't refuse it without risking the loss of England from the Catholic Church. So he did what weak men in power often do: he delayed. The case dragged on for years. In 1529, a special legatine court was held in London to hear the case. It was here that Catherine made her most dramatic stand. Instead of answering the court, she walked across the hall, knelt at her husband's feet, and delivered a heartbreaking plea for justice in broken English. "Sir, I beseech you," she said, "for all the loves that hath been between us, take of me some pity and compassion, for I am a poor woman and a stranger born out of your dominion." She reminded him that she had been a true and obedient wife for over 20 years, and that when he first took her, she was a true maid, without touch of man. Then she rose, curtsied, and walked out of the court, never to return. Her courage won her the love of the English people, who gathered in the streets to cheer her, but it did nothing to change the king's mind. Frustrated by the Pope's delays, and relentlessly pushed by Anne, Henry took a radical step. He began to listen to reformers who argued that the King of England should be the head of the Church in his own realm, not the Pope. In 1531, he separated from Catherine for good. In January 1533, with Anne now pregnant, they were secretly married. And in May, the new Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer, a man sympathetic to Anne's cause, declared Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon null and void. Just days later, he declared the marriage to Anne Boleyn to be good and valid. The break with Rome was complete. Henry was now the supreme head of the Church of England. On June 1, 1533, Anne Boleyn was crowned Queen of England in a magnificent ceremony. But the crowds watched in sullen silence. They had loved Catherine, and they saw Anne as a usurper, a goggle-eyed whore. Anne had won the crown, but she had not won the hearts of the people. Her triumph, however, was incomplete. On September 7, 1533, she gave birth. But the child was not the longed-for son. It was a girl, named Elizabeth. Henry was disappointed, but he told Anne, "You and I are both young, and by God's grace, boys will follow." But boys did not follow. In 1534, she had a miscarriage. Then, in January 1536, on the very day that Catherine of Aragon was buried, Anne miscarried again, this time, of a male child. For Henry, this was the final straw. "I see that God will not give me male children," he said, and when Anne tried to blame the miscarriage on her shock at his recent jousting accident, he coldly replied that she should have no more boys by him. He had turned against her. He began to say he had been seduced by witchcraft into the marriage, and that because God did not permit them to have a son, the marriage must be null and void. And once again, as his love for one wife died, his eye fell upon another. Her name was Jane Seymour. She was one of Anne's maids of honor, a quiet, pale, and seemingly meek young woman, the complete opposite of the fiery, sharp-witted Anne. Jane was from a respectable country family, and she had once served Catherine of Aragon, whom she greatly admired. She and her family were part of the conservative faction at court who disliked Anne and her reformist religious views. They saw in Jane an opportunity to unseat the Queen. Starting in late 1535, Henry began to court Jane, showering her with gifts. And Jane, well advised by her ambitious brothers, played the same game Anne had once played so successfully. She presented herself as a model of virtue, refusing to become the king's mistress and hinting that she could only be his in marriage. For Anne, history was repeating itself with terrifying speed. She saw the king's affection turning to Jane, and she panicked. But this time, Henry was not prepared to wait another 7 years. He wanted Anne gone. A divorce or annulment would be messy and difficult. It would call into question the legitimacy of their daughter, Elizabeth. So, Henry and his chief minister, Thomas Cromwell, devised a more final solution. In April 1536, Cromwell began to build a case against the Queen. Spies gathered gossip from her household. Anne was accused of adultery with 5 men, including her own brother, George Boleyn. She was also charged with plotting the king's death. Adultery in a queen was treason. The charges were monstrous, and almost certainly false, but they served their purpose. On May 2, 1536, Anne Boleyn was arrested and taken to the Tower of London. "Mr. Kingston," she asked the constable of the Tower, "do I go into a dungeon?" "No, madam," he replied. "You shall go into the lodging you lay in at your coronation." "It is too good for me," she sobbed, before falling into a fit of hysterical laughter. Her trial was a mere formality. The men accused with her were tried and condemned. On May 15, Anne and her brother stood trial in the Great Hall of the Tower. She defended herself with courage and intelligence, but the verdict was a foregone conclusion. She was found guilty and sentenced to death. Even now, Henry had one last cruelty in store. He ordered an executioner from France, a man skilled with a sword rather than the clumsy English axe, a final, twisted gesture of mercy for the woman he had once moved heaven and earth to marry. On the morning of May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn walked to the scaffold on Tower Green. She was calm and composed. "Good Christian people," she said, "I am come hither to die, according to law. I pray and beseech you all to pray for the life of the king, who is one of the best princes on the face of the earth, who has always treated me so well." She knelt, blindfolded. A single stroke of the sword, and it was over. As her head fell, The cannons on the Tower Wharf fired a salute, signaling to the king, waiting miles away, that he was free. The very next day, Henry VIII was betrothed to Jane Seymour. They were married 10 days later. Jane was everything Anne was not. Her motto was bound to obey and serve. She was gentle, quiet, and devoted herself to restoring a sense of pious calm to the court. She also worked to reconcile Henry with his eldest daughter Mary, who was brought back to court and treated with kindness by her new stepmother. But Jane knew her most important duty. In the spring of 1537, it was announced that the Queen was pregnant. The entire country held its breath. On October 12, 1537, after a long and difficult labor, she gave birth to a son. At last, Henry had his heir, Prince Edward. The celebrations were ecstatic. But the joy was to be short-lived. Jane, weakened by the birth, contracted puerperal fever, a common and deadly infection in those days. For days she fought for her life, but on October 24, just 12 days after her triumph, she died. Henry was genuinely heartbroken. He had loved Jane in his own way, and he would later call her his only true wife. He wore black for months and ordered the court into mourning until the following Easter. For the rest of his life, he would cherish her memory, and he left instructions in his will to be buried beside her. The king was now a widower with 3 children, 2 declared illegitimate daughters and an infant son. The need for another wife, another queen to act as a mother to his children and perhaps provide more sons, was urgent. And so, the search began again. This time, the choice was purely political. His chief minister, Thomas Cromwell, arranged a match with a German Protestant princess, Anne of Cleves, to secure an alliance against the Catholic powers of France and Spain. Henry had never seen her, but he was shown a beautiful portrait of her by the great painter Hans Holbein, and he fell in love with the image. In January 1540, Anne of Cleves arrived in England. Henry, unable to contain his excitement, rode in disguise to Rochester to surprise her. The surprise was his. The woman he met was tall, large-boned, and plain, with a face marked by smallpox. She bore no resemblance to the delicate beauty in Holbein's portrait. Henry was horrified. "I like her not, I like her not," he raged at Cromwell. He felt utterly deceived. But the political alliance was too important, and the wedding preparations were too far advanced. With a heavy heart, he went through with the marriage on January 6, 1540. The wedding night was a disaster. He told Cromwell the next day, "I liked her before not well, but now I like her much worse." He found her physically repulsive, complaining of her evil smells and concluding from her body that she was no virgin. "I have left her as good a maid as I found her," he declared. The marriage was never consummated. Fortunately for Anne of Cleves, she was a sensible and good-humored woman. When, after just 6 months, Henry decided he wanted an annulment, she did not fight him as Catherine of Aragon had done. She wisely agreed to the dissolution of the marriage, accepted the face-saving fiction that a supposed pre-contract to another man made their union invalid, and in return, Henry was incredibly generous. He gave her a handsome income, several fine houses including Anne Boleyn's childhood home of Hever Castle, and the honorary title of his beloved sister. Anne lived out the rest of her days in England in comfort and freedom, a respected member of the royal family, eventually dying of natural causes in 1557. She was, without a doubt, the luckiest of all the wives. The reason for Henry's sudden need to end the Cleves marriage was, once again, a woman. This time, it was Catherine Howard, a niece of the Duke of Norfolk and, ironically, a first cousin of Anne Boleyn. She was a vivacious, pretty teenager, perhaps as young as 15, when she caught the eye of the aging, obese, and increasingly unwell king. Henry, now nearly 50, was completely infatuated. He called her his rose without a thorn. They were married in July 1540, just days after the annulment from Anne of Cleves was finalized. Catherine was flighty, foolish, and loved nothing more than dancing, pretty clothes, and amusement. Henry doted on her, showering her with jewels and indulging her every whim. But his rose had a past. Before coming to court, while living in the lax household of her grandmother, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk, Catherine had had affairs with two men, her music teacher, Henry Manox, and a gentleman named Francis Derham. She was not the innocent virgin the king believed her to be. This might have remained a secret, but Catherine made a fatal mistake. She brought people from her past into her new household as queen, including Francis Derham, whom she made her private secretary. Worse, she embarked on a new, incredibly reckless flirtation with one of the king's favorite courtiers, a young man named Thomas Culpeper. With the help of her lady-in-waiting, the infamous Lady Rochford, the widow of Anne Boleyn's brother, she arranged secret nighttime meetings with Culpeper. In the autumn of 1541, while the king was on a progress to the north, Archbishop Cranmer was given information about the Queen's past conduct. He knew he had to tell the king, but he dreaded it. On his return to Hampton Court, he slipped a letter detailing the accusations into Henry's hand during Mass. Henry's reaction was first disbelief, then a terrible, heartbreaking sorrow. The man who had faced down popes and emperors wept openly before his council, lamenting his ill luck in meeting with such ill-conditioned wives. An investigation was launched. Derham and Culpeper were arrested and, under interrogation and likely torture, they confessed. The evidence was damning. In February 1542, Catherine Howard, not yet 20, was executed on Tower Green for treason, along with Lady Rochford. She died frightened but penitent, admitting she deserved to die but swearing she had never been unfaithful to the king. Henry was once again alone, a broken man. He was old, sick, and had been utterly humiliated. It seemed unlikely he would marry again. But a year later, in 1543, he did. His sixth and final wife was Catherine Parr, a mature and twice widowed lady in her early 30s. This was not a marriage of passion, but of comfort and companionship. Catherine Parr was intelligent, kind, and deeply religious, with reformist sympathies she had to carefully conceal. Her greatest achievement as queen was to reunite Henry with his three children. She created a stable family life for Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth, overseeing their education and acting as a true mother to them. She was more of a nurse than a wife to the ailing king, patiently tending to his foul-smelling leg ulcer and engaging him in theological debates to take his mind off the pain. But even this nearly led to her downfall. Conservative enemies at court, led by Bishop Gardiner, tried to trap her on charges of heresy, even drawing up a warrant for her arrest. But Catherine, warned in time, cleverly threw herself on the king's mercy, professing that she only argued with him to learn from his great wisdom. Charmed, Henry forgave her and turned his wrath on her accusers. Catherine Parr outlived the king. Henry VIII died on January 28, 1547, at the age of 55. Catherine was at his side, and he died holding her hand, having found in his final years a measure of peace with this good and gentle woman. After his death, she finally married the man she had loved all along, Thomas Seymour, but her happiness was brief. She died in childbirth in 1548, the last of Henry's 6 remarkable wives. Commentary. So, there we have it. The sweeping, dramatic, and often tragic story of 6 women bound by destiny to one of the most formidable men in history. When you step back from the individual stories, a larger picture emerges, a picture that tells us a great deal about the world they lived in, and perhaps something about our own. At its core, this is a story about power. The absolute, unquestionable power of a king, and the almost complete powerlessness of the women around him, even those who wore a crown. Each of these women, in her own way, had to navigate a world where her survival depended on her ability to please one man and to give him a son. It was an impossible task, and for many, it ended in heartbreak and death. Catherine of Aragon's story is a profound lesson in principle and endurance. She refused to compromise her identity as queen and wife, even when it cost her everything. In her unwavering belief in the rightness of her cause, she became a symbol of defiance, a woman who would rather be broken than bend. Anne Boleyn, on the other hand, is a masterclass in ambition. She saw an opportunity and seized it with both hands, refusing to play by the rules of the game and instead rewriting them entirely. She was a revolutionary, and while her ambition ultimately led to her destruction, it's impossible not to feel a sense of awe at her audacity. She gambled for the highest prize and, for a time, she won. Jane Seymour's story is quieter, but no less significant. She represents the ideal Tudor woman, meek, obedient, and fruitful. She succeeded where the others had failed, but her story is also a heartbreaking reminder of the dangers of childbirth in that era. Her death highlights the fragility of life, even for a queen at the height of her triumph. And then there are the later wives, each offering a lesson in survival. Anne of Cleves, the political pawn, showed incredible shrewdness in turning a humiliating rejection into a life of comfortable independence. Catherine Howard's story is a tragic cautionary tale about youth, foolishness, and the brutal consequences of being caught in the webs of courtly intrigue. And finally, Catherine Parr, the survivor, who brought a measure of peace and stability to the king's chaotic final years, and who showed that wisdom and kindness could be their own form of power. So what can we, living centuries later, take from these stories? I think it's a deeper appreciation for the constraints that have shaped women's lives throughout history, and an admiration for the different ways these women responded to those constraints. Some fought, some submitted, some adapted, and some survived. There is no single right way to navigate a world that is not built for you. Each of their lives is a testament to a different kind of strength. This story reminds us that history is not just a collection of dates and facts. It's made up of the choices, hopes, and heartbreaks of real people. These 6 women were not just queens, they were daughters, sisters, lovers, and mothers, each struggling to find her place in a dangerous and unforgiving world. And in their stories, we can see the enduring power of the human spirit to love, to strive, and to endure. That was a summary of The 6 Wives of Henry VIII by Alison Weir. We've journeyed through the dramatic highs and tragic lows today, but I'll be honest with you, a summary can only ever be a map of the territory. The real treasure is found when you walk the path yourself. The true magic of this book is in the rich detail, the subtle moments of human connection, and the immersive world that Alison Weir so brilliantly creates. This summary is just an invitation, a glimpse through the keyhole. If any of these incredible stories resonated with you, if you felt a spark of curiosity or a pang of sympathy, then I truly encourage you to pick up a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning history, it's about experiencing it, and in doing so, you might just find it changes the way you think about the past and the people who lived it. The link to the book is in the description below. Also, if this journey back to the Tudor court was valuable to you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It lets us know we're on the right track and ensures you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep learning and growing together.